I think I'm going to go home and be very depressed because I think we learned enough today to recognize what we're doing wrong, but didn't have enough time to learn actually how to fix the problems. So, but certainly there were some take-home points that could be helpful. So, anyways, start with this first slide here, largely just to remind people that there are pigs east of Indiana, and that's where we're located. And really what I want to talk to you about today has been our main focus over the last several months has been really just to try to understand how to make the task that we've given ourselves tractable. And so at some level, for several years, we've been building a GIS database. It's now up to over 500 sites. We figure about 75,000 sows, and probably accounts for more than 3/4 of the production of swine production in Pennsylvania. The challenge we have is that when you look at the dimensions of this, it's over 15,000 square miles. So obviously, what we need to do is start to think about how can we break this down into a more accessible problem to try to make progress. And when we first started to talk about this with our producer base, someone piped up and said, when we introduced this idea of area control, they said, oh, you mean it takes a village to control PRRS. And so we've kind of used that as a tagline, and that's just to point out another unique thing about Pennsylvania is we actually have Democrats there as well. But for us, and the challenge is, if it takes a village, then what defines a village? And I think the thing that intrigues us is once we get these different smaller subregions defined, will they have the need for unique or different control strategies to achieve PRRS eradication? So what I wanted to talk to you about really was just our efforts to how we're going to define these villages. And really the first thing that we're focused on is getting direction from the industry itself. So later in the month we have a meeting scheduled for our stakeholder group. And as some of the things we heard about today, we really want to let them start to help define some of our geographic priorities. And I think it's, obviously it's very important that they're involved in the process because they're going to need to take some ownership of this project. So, but the other thing I think we're very interested in is that we try to help them make informed decisions. So much of our effort has been focused on generating more knowledge about PRRS in the state of Pennsylvania. And there are kind of three things that we've been working on here over the last several months in terms of understanding the attributes of PRRS, so trying to better understand and describe what swine production looks like in Pennsylvania. Also understand a little bit better about what the risks are for individual sites in terms of PRRS infection. And then also seeing if we can look historically to try to understand how the PRRS virus moves about the state. So I'll talk about each one of those briefly. One of the things we've been doing is these are some of the different attributes of the industry that we've been able to document in terms of geography, density of farms, stages of production, number of stakeholders. We've been mapping these and looking for kind of obvious trends in trying to use that information to help define areas. I won't get into the details there, but just to simply say that what we found is that in Pennsylvania, the swine production is actually somewhat diversified, and maybe actually we think that's a good thing because we like the idea that maybe perhaps what we find out in Pennsylvania may actually be applicable to other places across the country because of this diversity in, parts of the state look like Colorado, other parts might look like North Carolina, and other parts might look like southern Minnesota. So we're hoping that what we learn in Pennsylvania has use to others. The other thing which we've focused on, which others have talked about as well, is looking at using the PADRAP tool to go ahead and look at PRRS risks on some of the sow herds in Pennsylvania. And we're happy to report, a lot like the children in Lake Wobegon, it appears as though most of the Pennsylvania swine units that we've looked at are above average. And so, I mean, that makes us feel good that basically, many of our farms seem to have favorable risk attributes. So in terms of control program, that gives us a little bit of courage to push forward. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about was what we'd done trying to use a little bit of molecular epidemiology to look at the transmission of PRRS virus in the state. And so basically, obviously what we wanted to know is how it's been moving through the state. And so we had a bank of strains that had been isolated in the state, and so we wanted to do some analysis on that, and I'll share that with you. I think I'll give you the one kind of proviso is that obviously I wouldn't overinterpret what we find here because we're limited by the retrospective nature of the study. So, it's the data that we have, but there was not any systematic approach to collecting that data. So we started with a database of about 66 sequences from 24 unique sites that spanned a 9-year time horizon. And we weeded through that, and we ended up with 37 unique sequence site time combinations, if that makes sense to everyone. And then we started to analyze those 37 pieces of data. And what we were looking for was homology, so similarity between these virus sequences, and particularly on the open reading frame number 5 of the virus. And we used the criteria that was suggested by John Roberts several years ago as saying if there was 97% sequence homology, we would consider that a similar or related virus. Okay, and so I think the most remarkable thing that comes out of looking at these sequences is that most of them are dissimilar. So of those 37 ones that we analyzed, 10 had no similarities at all. So there were no other sequences in the database that met our criteria for homology. But of the 27 that did exhibit some similarity, on average, only 3 other sequences were similar to those viruses. So flipping around to look at the other way is that for any given virus, there were 35 other viruses in the database that were dissimilar or did not show homology as we defined it. But then what we did was focus actually on the similarities. You can see they cluster as you would expect in a dendrogram. And so I've tried to shade out the names here to protect the guilty. But basically, what you can see, this is a dendrogram, and the colored blocks represent what we defined as clusters of homologous viruses. The black areas are those 10 unique strains or sequences that had no homology. But you can see how things cluster out there. And what we did then was did some analysis on these clusters, and so we calculated the interfarm distance between all farms within the cluster, and then we're able to take an average number for that. And what you can see here, a couple different things jump out at us. So first, there was a whole set of clusters that actually had no distance between them. So these were repeated isolations of the same virus from the same site. Okay, so those are somewhat uninteresting because probably just farms that largely probably never had been sampling and just simply had never gotten rid of the virus. But what was interesting then, of the other clusters, there were fairly large distances between these farms. Okay, and within any cluster, there was at least one pair that was greater than 20 miles apart. But I think the most striking thing that we found was that with one exception, all clusters, the sequences were isolated from a common company, so to a unique production company. And so the one exception where we had within a cluster where we had multiple production companies involved, this was the case here where there was actually quite large distances involved in red there. But that was actually a vaccine strain, was what we had isolated out. So our interpretation of the data we have from Pennsylvania suggests that there's actually very little evidence for area spread of virus, because I think we'd expect to see it crossing between farm systems more, and it looks as though some farm systems might be actually quite effective at moving it between their sites. But obviously that's an opportunity, and so we think that this type of analysis will give us some direction as we start to develop appropriate control strategies, and we're hopeful that by virus elimination from individual farms or within pools of a production system should greatly reduce the overall risk of virus exposure within the state.